we have several ARC folks in the audience there. They will bring the mic to you. So please get your questions ready. And while actually we are getting going here, maybe I'll start with the first question. I think this morning, pretty much in all the presentations, one thing that came up is, the people aspects of actually digital transformation. Bringing all, executives as well as the workforce to some sort of common understanding. It's a culture change. And I'd like to ask you, perhaps you could share, what are you doing to bring your, everybody on the same page? How are you going through your culture change and so forth at your companies? And maybe, Larry, I know you talked about it. Maybe could we start with you?
Sure. Oh, sure. So maybe I'll share two things that we're doing, one at a strategic level and one at sort of a boots on the ground kind of level. So at a strategic level, the way we run our business is very business unit centric, and our business units happen to be geographically based, right? So one thing that we realize is, while I have a corporate team that works out of the States, that the only way we're going to be effective is to basically embed satellite teams within our business units who have sort of, in our case, an analytics, a data science kind of skill set, so they can help work with those local businesses to really help them, kind of on this journey, right? So those teams are there to, if we develop something nice from, let's say, from the perspective of a corporate team for a different business unit, they can then customize it locally, right? If they're in China or Brazil or Mexico, and vice versa, because they'll naturally be closer to the business in some places, especially, our international geographies, then they'll be able to find solutions locally that, that people wouldn't have seen. And that's now all of a sudden, people in those business units, they've had problems to solve, and they know where they want to go, but they haven't had the technical resources to help them solve it, right? So putting folks on the ground, it really helps them quite a bit be able to do that. So that's one thing we did strategically. The other thing I would just say, sort of on a day-to-day basis, is we're lucky in the sense of we have a pretty strong, what we would call a productivity program, Lean, Six Sigma, embedded across the corporation for many years. And so we really leverage those Lean specialists as part of, when you're talking about the individual product level, we really leverage those Lean specialists to say, let's map out what the current work process is, and let's get everybody who has a stake in it in the room together, and let's try to figure out what the 2B work processes is, and then sort of the design and solution around that, right? So those are a couple of things that we do.
Excellent. And go ahead, Nihar.
Sure. So I want to cover two examples just to illustrate how you can enable your workforce to take advantage of digitalization. The first is, on the shop floor level, right? We all talk about digital transformation and how you want to change the way you run your business and so forth. One of the things I'm really excited about in the last year and a half is we have started experimenting with collaborative robots, right? Most of the places where we have our factories, the unemployment rate is about 2%. So even if you wanted to, you can't find people to work in these places. So the collaborative robots, these cost $30,000, $40,000, and the beauty of it is you don't need a PhD to program them. You can basically get your blue-collar worker to program it in a matter of minutes, just showing them how to do repetitive tasks. And these people are actually wanting these robots beside them because it makes their life easier. They don't have to do the same repetitive tasks that are normal in manufacturing. They can take advantage of these robots and focus on some of the more complex activities. And it's a win-win relationship for us. And this isn't a mandate that comes down from top management that says you want to digitalize. This is people on the ground realizing that there are benefits to technology and adopting it on their own. So to me, that is an exciting aspect of how you can enable your people. Just give them the freedom to try out these things and see how it works, and the adoption rate just skyrockets from that point on. The second example I want to talk about is, very often I find that we have a disconnect between what I call the geeks versus business, right? So you have your data scientists, you have all the smart people who know how technology should work, and on the other side you have business that says, I have certain needs and I want to get things done, but I have no clue what these guys are talking about, because I can't understand a word of stochastic modeling and all kinds of crazy stuff that these guys are coming up with. And what I found is we have a small group, what I call the translators, right? So they understand the business enough, and they understand enough about the technology to be able to bridge that gap. And recently we started doing projects on big data analytics, where we are able to predict in many of our distribution businesses where we have thousands and thousands of customers, inevitably we lose some customers, right? So this is pretty normal in a retail environment, but pretty radical for a manufacturing company to think about it that way. And what we have found is, by looking at our data, which we already have, we are able to predict with a 70+% accuracy when a customer is going to leave us, right? Maybe they're unhappy because we didn't deliver stuff on time, or we messed up their last order, or whatever, but we don't ever realize it because that revenue is just walking out the door and they go away to somebody else. But having that data and insight, we can give it to a salesperson or whoever else to then do something about it, right? Or not buy the inventory, so we're not stuck with stuff that's not going to sell. So there is many benefits to it, but having and empowering people with how to use this technology is, I think, the way you can increase adoption and get better reception from the business to take on some of these new ideas.
Thanks, Nihar. Raj, you have any comment?
Yeah, so maybe let me add a couple of comments to this, because we're always very fixated on technology and how technology makes everything better. It's not a technology problem in industry right now. There's a lot of technology. You hear all the great companies that are doing different things, including ourselves. It's a cultural transformation. So I would just say in our own environment, digital and digitalization permeates the DNA of the company. And so, if I just think about the innovation side, I think we spend about 5.6 billion euros in 2018. It's a 40% increase from 2014 to 17. So that just shows you how much focus and intensity there is to really innovate. And this is not just making external acquisitions or exogenous growth. This is really about internal R&D and innovation to integrate the meat points. So, my general sense is, there's $50 million in the United States, and that's used for continuing workforce education. But fundamentally, if you're not digitally adept and capable, you're probably not going to have a great career inside of Siemens. It's just the way the world is going. That's one thing. The second thing is we have to get the infrastructure in the United States, which has an aging asset base. So you see, technologies sitting in these plants that are from the 80s that are akin to 286 computers. You just simply can't get productivity with that. So people say, how do I get on the Internet of Things? I said, well, get on the Internet first, and then we'll talk about IoT. But so this is fundamentally what we're really dealing with, is how do we transform the cultural environment? And so there's a lot of work with the skill sets and domain expertise inside of Siemens to be able to move into the infrastructure where we see aging asset base, where we see disparate technologies, where we see boomers that are eligible for retirement, to be able to show them a scaled blueprint as to what to do. And some of that may be technology agnostic, right? Because they need a blueprint. People will pay for it if they know they're going to be world-class in manufacturing, IT and OT. So there's a lot of work being done to internally recruit the right people, but I would say also externally, in-kind software donations, apprenticeship programs, much more mechatronics delivery here in the U.S. infrastructure. The Siemens Foundation, which works very intensively on the whole middle skills initiative, because it's just not simply enough to go to someone and capture them, in their third year of college. I mean, you got to get them early and got to get them interested and vitalized on manufacturing. So it's happening in a multitude of ways. But it's really what U.S. manufacturing needs to accelerate. It's not about someone's widget that's able to do this feature better than the other, because there's plenty of that.
Thanks, Raj.
Can I just
Greg?
add,
Yeah.
Can I add a comment? Is that working?
You're welcome. Start talking.
So let me just add a point about culture that you mentioned here. We just did a bunch of work over the last 12 months on culture of Aviva, and we ended up coming back to, we want it to be authentic when an employee they're of course, a business serves our employees and our customers and partners and our shareholders. But when an employee shows up with a customer or partner, we want them to engage with a certain sort of spirit that you mentioned around innovation, flexibility, integrity. And so we said, how can we make that authentic so that our excitement about this digital transformation is conveyed by them to the customers? We heard back from what was important to our employees. So one thing we did was we committed 1% of our profits for social causes, roughly aligned around UN sustainability initiatives. So in their free time, they can engage and typically it's aligned around our business. The other thing we said is we need to be more quick, more flexible. So we now have over 150 Scrum teams of about 8 to 12 people per Scrum team. And every 90 days, we reprioritize those Scrum teams based around what our employees hear from our customers. And then that goes back into the product cycle. So this sort of, this is this clock speed, I think, sort of at the point you're on about innovation, the learning. When you're on a journey, you have to realize you better be learning along the way, and you better have an employee base who's eager and passionate and excited about that.
Excellent. Patrick, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I guess I'll say the one thing we changed is our attitude. Over the last several years, I've been in the technology business for a while. I mean, we sold products, we sold widgets, and if people would buy the widget and use it the right way, they would make money. That was the deal. And it worked great for a while as all the individual disciplines in the world were automated. But it started to slow down. It really did. And we've started to change our entire approach about how we engage customers. Just like Raj mentioned, not thinking about selling an elevator, but thinking about selling an experience to a customer. And you start to really think differently. Instead of services, you start to think about customer success. Right? It's not what they'll pay for at the right margin. It's what it takes to have to get them to have the right experience so they'll recommend you. And that's much more profitable than any services margin you can make. And we started to push that through our entire company because obviously, with Hexagon, we've got a very broad portfolio. If we were trying to sell widgets, you can't find a sales force that can master so many widgets. So you've got to become better at selling outcomes to customers instead of widgets. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Great. Okay, let's see if we can see some show of hands where we have some questions. Yeah, and we have, as I mentioned, we have some mics in the audience. Okay, okay. Come on, folks. As we talked about, don't be shy. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jane Arnold from Covestro. I'm curious, you have a wide range of perspectives on the stage. The chemical industry has been hesitant to really embrace digital transformation. It's been a slow change. What have you seen as being the biggest roadblocks, and how would you recommend overcoming them?
Okay. Well, closest to chemical industry, Larry, I have to call on you.
Okay. So I might counter that a little bit, right? Because obviously it depends on the company, but when I talk to people, because I own the whole, I'll quote, digital innovation portfolio for Praxair, and we work across all the verticals. We work across manufacturing, our supply chain, our business processes, and is how we engage with our end customers. And the message that I always give folks is, on the operations side, I would argue that we're actually quite digitally sophisticated in how we run our operating plants, right? There's a lot of automation. People have been using supervisory control for 25 or 30 years. We're doing more around real-time monitoring and some of the reliability things. So I say my counter would be on the operations space. I think in general, certainly the larger companies are actually pretty good at it and actually have a lot of thought leadership in that space. As you go across that continuum, from our perspective, that's where we get less and less sophisticated, right? I always tell people that we engage our end customers in a digital way like a company that's been digitizing its plants for the last 30 years, right? We don't really think about it very much, and how do we really engage with our end customers? So it's not that there's not opportunities, and so maybe that wasn't the best answer you were looking for your question. Now, clearly, in the chemical space, of course, what's the priority, right? Safety is first, reliability is second, efficiency is third. Or productivity, a lot of the digitalization initiatives are around efficiency, and so you obviously have to be able to address those first two things first, and that will naturally limit some of the speed at which you can move. And then the other thing, I guess, finally, that I'll mention, as I mentioned this morning, and I'll just do a quick plug for the Open group, right, as part of ARC, part of the challenge is, right, when we put in a control system into our plants, it's going to be there for 20 years or 30 years, right? And so you accumulate technical debt, and how do you overcome that, right? So that is one of the challenges that we have to address.
Can I add? So I think.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
in chemical, this idea of safety, so put some metrics in place. So information in 3 minutes or less. How could you find out any information about your facilities in 3 minutes or less in a way that would help you more run a safer facility? Then optimize the assets that you already have, the capex already, the sunk cost, those 30 to 50 years. Find a way to optimize those. You drive down the street, pretty much all of those facilities, those chemical facilities you see, they're like, they wouldn't be playing the Super Bowl. They wouldn't even qualify, to get into the first round. They're running because they're not applying technology that's widely available today. And so you're trying to find a cause, a reason to push them to take that trigger, and we have a couple of ideas to do that. And then the third thing we found is really kind of simple, is visualize the data. It's incredible what you can do. When you can see what's happening inside those facilities, those chemical facilities, suddenly everyone understands the problem. They have a desire to do something. They're fearful of missing out on what others are doing, and that drives activity. That would be my three.
Go ahead, Rod.
Yeah. So just a comment I'll make, and I think it was a very, very good question, to bring it up around the chemical industry. But if you know Venn diagrams, the chemical industry is not A union B with food and beverage and automotive and discrete manufacturing. There's a commonality and there's an intersection between all the issues these companies face in digital maturity. And no one's sitting at a digital maturity level of a 10 that I know of. And we're touching every single industry. The comment I made, and I preface my opening comments about how important it is to scale, to benchmark, to show proof of ROI very, very quickly. And this isn't a wreck and replace strategy. This is a scale into it strategy. So, and I think there's a lot of generational learning in this. This is why you just can't turn digital on and off. There's going to be proof points. There's going to be some failures. You hope the failing is fast. And then if you fail, you're able to get more adept. And use advanced technologies to deliver much more ROI. So I think benchmarking. I think being able to scale things very, very quickly, doing pilots, these are all critically important factors to build confidence on the manufacturing floor and build confidence in the workforce. And it's simply not enough anymore just to have a chief digital officer. That's one singular individual that sits in a company, but that's not culturally transforming the manufacturing operations, the maintenance electricians, all the intangible things that are required to make technology move and work. Right, and so you have to holistically look at this and also give someone a view as to what the art of the possible is. So you have a lot of well-intentioned people that sit in manufacturing environments that are very technologically adept, very intelligent, but if they don't know what benchmark would look like and what the end state would look like, they would never design to it. You would just design an ecosystems and design in pieces and parts. And then what you're left with is a lot of disparate things that are happening, and then you're trying to connect it together. So my view, not atypical just of the chemical industry, but permeates a lot of other industries as well.
Thanks, Rod. Okay, let's see if we have a question over here. Yeah. Okay, folks. Mike. Could we have Mike? Mike, folks. Could you kind of stand in the middle of our ARC? Folks can stand, stick around 3 places. Okay, yeah.
Good morning, John Cusimano with AE Solutions. Several of you mentioned how that the manufacturing industry is somewhat laggards in adopting digitalization. Even though we've digitalized our control systems for many years, the move to completely digitalize the business has been slow. And I think there's in many cases it is a conservative industry that we work in, and maybe for good reason, because the consequences of failure can be catastrophic. I'm not saying I'm opposed to digitalization at all. I'm just saying one of the things I haven't heard any of the speakers talk about is security, and that's a topic that I know is on the minds of many here. Is how do we responsibly integrate and move to a digital ecosystem, if you will, and still maintain security, because there is so much at risk in these manufacturing companies. If we move too fast, we might find ourselves in a dangerous position.
Yeah, cybersecurity. Okay,
that's a great question. In fact, we're getting very good at answering that question for all clients, because everybody's read about some cyber attack, whether it was something designed to do damage or just a playful virus or whatever. We've all seen that, and it's a legitimate concern. I think you have to treat it just be very adult about it. It's a cost. It is a part of the cost of digital transformation, and I think I'd encourage all of you as you look at that. It shouldn't be considered. It's not a big monster. It's very solvable if you have the right plan. But at the same time, you've got to stick to your guns. If you don't see a good ROI, including the cost of appropriate cybersecurity, and that can be done, then don't move forward. Keep piloting until you find the right combination, because there are many, many different ways to approach cybersecurity today. That's what we see.
Yeah, so I would say as manufacturing companies, the biggest Achilles heel is the fact that most are engineers. And you want to know the answer and the exact business case, the return on investment before you even make the first step. Right? Security, yes, is important, but I think there are other factors that prevent most manufacturing companies from making that first leap, because they're expecting certainty in an environment where rapid, fail fast and try things and keep moving on is sort of the mantra, right? So in that sense, unless you get over that initial hurdle and be willing to try out new things and be willing to fail on occasion in order for you to ultimately be successful, it requires a mind shift change. And security and GDPR and a whole host of other things are, I think, excuses for a lot of companies to not even take that first step.
Yeah. Raj, I know at your company you have some initiatives in this regard. What are you doing to help your customers feel at home?
So my general statement is this: that when you historically thought about security, you thought about the IT environment. And even in your consumer life, you never even thought about buying a PC that had software on it without malware protection. But it was okay somehow to let the OT environment not really have that. And those systems were inherently not built to be secure. But today you have advanced technologies, you're networking, you're using industrial Ethernet to connect things. So this is now open to the external environment. So again, when we talk about a holistic approach inside of our company, we are, security is an imperative in not just product hardening, but in perimeter access, in how people work, defense in depth. So if you think about a submarine has holds in it, right? So if water permeates a submarine, you can stop it in a certain block and it doesn't, submerge the whole submarine. So this is the way you have to think about security. You have holds, you have perimeter access, you have whitelisting, you have product hardening. This is all being done in the concept of, and in the context of Industry 4.0 delivery. So when you're able to do a holistic solution, and we look at it holistically, from the ideation and design of a plant, all the way to the manufacturing process, all the way down to a sensor and actuator. So how do we really drive inherent security in all these capabilities? It still won't prevent somebody from physically doing something inside of a plant. If you look at the greatest example of, spinning the Iran nuclear reactors out of control, it came with someone operating with a thumb drive, right? Not that someone got into the Ethernet network and moved in. So it came with physical problems. So all this has to be looked at, contextualized, and when you're doing a holistic blueprint, you have to have this built in. So, it's just something that we do. It's something where there's been a lot of innovation, and cybersecurity centers and operations centers. So we're able to do managed services to really hook up to installations and look at predictive and preventative threats around security.
Larry, from your point of view, how are you managing cybersecurity risk at Brexit?
So to the question, right? We don't look at it as an either/or proposition, right? Either we can be secure or we can do innovation, right? It has to work in lockstep. So that's one thing. We always talk about, and even when our CIO and so forth talks to the board, he talks about having a defensible security strategy. Nobody's going to be 100% secure. You have to sort of live with that, right? If you unless you want to put air gaps in everything, right? So you just have to be realistic and say we're going to have a security strategy that, there's a very low risk, but there'll always be some risk, right, of some infiltration. What steps are we taking? Certainly on the hardware or technology side, we've done a lot over the last few years to invest in making sure all of our control system hardware, our PCs in the control room, et cetera, right, are up to speed and all that, operating systems, patches, all of that, right? We've worked on our processes to make sure those things are all up to date. And then we've also worked on the people side where we have established basically over the past few years a security monitoring team. Not a lot of people, but a few folks in the States, a few in Europe, a few in Asia, so that we basically have 24/7 visibility around security breaches. And then also from a process perspective, working with folks both internally and externally who can audit our security stuff on a regular basis. So again, it does require investment, but it's not an impossible task to do. And then in parallel, we're still able to do the innovation work that we wanted.
Excellent. Okay, let's see if we can go to the next question over here. Yep.
Hey, right, Don Bartusiak with ExxonMobil Research and Engineering. So I have one question. And that's right, okay. Yeah. Comment is simple, so let me dispense with that first. It's really for Larry. I want to endorse the statement that you made about how you want to engage with suppliers and OEMs for remote support of equipment in your facilities. And you issued a call for a collaborative platform for providing that remote support. That makes a lot of sense to us as opposed to the picture of sending data into a black box where proprietary algorithms and proprietary cloud instances. So I just wanted to, that's my comment on what makes sense to us from a business perspective. My question, which I'll address to Nihar, but I'll expand it to the panel. Can you detail your experiences with predictive reliability? So Nihar, in your comment in example 1 with Max and the elevators, you say that you're actually predicting end of life of the elevators or components in the elevators. And then Larry, you've made some comments about predictive reliability successes in Praxair. Can the panel comment on your experiences with predictive reliability, your results, and maybe key success factors with predictive reliability technologies?
Sure. So at this point, we have, I would say, roughly 70-75% of our elevators in the United States covered with this IoT technology, right? To be honest, yes, it is still early days. We are learning every single day in terms of what is possible. If I told you that we had all the answers at the beginning, no, that's not true. I think with these kind of technologies, you know certain things before you get started, but you learn from the vast amount of data that is collected every single day, every minute from these devices. So from a predictive standpoint, where we are today is we can know for sure what type of failure is imminent to occur, right? So for example, if a door on an elevator is going to fail, we get that signal. And we have had anecdotal instances where a technician shows up at a customer and they get the question, why are you here? Well, we think the door is going to fail, right? It's a much better outcome than having it fail at a facility where the customer expects it to be operating 24/7 and having a few hours before the technician shows up to fix it. So yes, I mean, the short answer is we are learning. I think we are getting better at it. Is it fully mainstream? Not yet. But it is well down the path.
Can I
Go ahead,
jump
go
in?
ahead.
So this area is a really hot area, predictable reliability, preventing unplanned downtime. The segment is called Asset Performance Management. It basically takes all the data, stores it in a historian or pulls data from other historians, looks at the startup sequence today versus every other day, and tries to predict when a failure is going to occur. The issue with the space is false positives, where you think it's going to fail, but it actually wasn't going to fail. So that's actually the problem that the industry is trying to deal with right now. The answer to that is the more data you have, the better the model. And now I want to bring it to oil and gas. It turns out you have to have some knowledge about the cracker, about the pump, about the distillation columns. You have to have some knowledge about the models of those systems to be quite good at it. And so that's where the sort of horizontal providers struggle. The sort of the no disrespect to my California startup colleagues, but the latest startup is they really unlikely they have the models that are specific to your various onshore and offshore platforms. It's probably in our business, it's the fastest growing part of our business. It's over 10% of our revenue. Some of our customers have won awards. Duke Energy, $20 to $30 million savings on a turbine that was going to fail, and even the manufacturer thought it wasn't going to fail, and we were able to help them take it out of service and repair it before it failed. I would say if you're not running pilots in this space around asset performance management, run. It's probably the fastest way to do a return on investment back to your business.
Yeah. Larry, any?
Well, I guess a couple of thoughts there, right? So as I mentioned this morning, right, we're pretty good at telling you that something's wrong with the machine. We still have a long way to go to really point the expert to say, this is a specific problem without generating a lot of false positives. And we kind of think about it, I don't know, many companies use, the safety period, right? Safety pyramid, right? Which at the top of the pyramid would be a fatality or a fatality potential event. And at the bottom of the pyramid, I'll get it, is more around at-risk behaviors, right? And so I think we try to kind of treat it as the same way, which is we're trying to at least get better because, fortunately, we have very few catastrophic failures of equipment in our fleet. So you can't build a model based on 2 failures and a bunch of data necessarily. But what you can do, again, is you can start to measure when you're deviating from expected performance. And again, it does create quote unquote false positives, but at least it targets the reliability team to say, okay, I'm a reliability engineer. I'm responsible for 50 compressors. And here's the top 5 where I'm having a problem, and I'll go investigate them. And maybe on 4 I won't find anything, but maybe on 1 I'll find something, and either I take it down, or at least I can make a smart decision around to when to take it down. That's kind of where we're at as sort of as part of kind of our state of the art today.
Thanks.
Okay, just one comment. Those are great comments, so I won't copy any of those. I've got some great experience actually from ExxonMobil, and I know that they've been pioneers at taking some very big, at the time, 10, 20 years ago, very big risks in experimenting with how long you can run equipment, way beyond manufacturer recommendations. And they learned a lot from it. One thing I'd counsel everybody, this is hard. Once I counsel everybody, don't think that there's going to be magic, because there isn't going to be. Right? There are real practical lessons. Like turbines fail because of process upsets more than they do because the blades weren't thick enough. That's how you fail. You need to know those kind of failure mechanisms for your critical equipment. You need to find technology that serves that interest. If you can't understand it, if you're being asked to, wait for the black box to tell you, I probably wouldn't buy that technology, or at least I'd limit it to a pilot. Get practical, look at how you can capture that real world, the real details of what's going on in whatever technology you choose, and I think you'll be better off.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so just one additional comment. I do think this is where there's an opportunity for collaboration, cross-company collaboration around, at a high level at least, sharing of incidents and the causes behind them, right? It's sort of, we deal, even within our industry, right? We deal with safety at that level because it's that important. And in this space, again, because there's so few, fortunately, catastrophic failures, but if we can find an effective way to share those experiences, right, then we can all sort of collectively be smarter and apply those things back to our own businesses. And part of the challenge is when you're talking about predictive reliability, basically what you're talking about is buying insurance policies for all your equipment. And there's always a question in capitally constrained businesses, right? How much do you really want to pay for an insurance policy, right? So the more that as an industry that we collaborate and say, look, here's a history of failures across the industry, and we could use that benchmark information, that would help each of us make a better case to our individual CFOs to say, hey, it's worth to spend the money in this space.
Excellent comments.
Just one quick comment on, in terms of false positives, just a quick story, right? As we were rolling this out for our elevators, so normally when we send technicians out, you got to pay them whatever their due is. And we had interesting conversations with our leadership around how do I bill for the time that it's a false positive, right? I send somebody in and nothing's wrong. It's a culture mind shift change. Yes, there are going to be mistakes or learnings of that kind, but you also fit that into the model so you get better next time. It is a journey, and it takes a lot to train everybody to think in that different way, as opposed to saying, I'm going to be right 100% of the time when rolling these things out.
Good. Go ahead.
So just, maybe the last comment that I would make, and I think all of these have been, good, really, really good, outstanding comments around predictive failure of a component. And, the comment I always make when I talk about scalability of digitalization, that cloud-based analytics and turning data into meaningful value is probably the most scalable part of digitalization that anyone can embark on quickly. But what I fundamentally think about is it's critically important to have domain expertise, which was brought up here, because you just can't take data in a horizontal sense without making it meaningful, making it, have the right visuals, having the right KPIs to really look at it and analyze it, and to have an open ecosystem where people can develop apps around it. I mean, think about the App Store. The success of the App Store has been that you've had a wide variety of ecosystem players that have built apps that do everything you'd want it to do. So it can't be closed, it can't be proprietary, and it's not just about assessing the failure of a product or the predictive failure of a product, but it's really about looking at the digital twin of performance. And so something that we always think about in MindSphere, in our application centers, and we got hundreds of these all over the world that are really built around domain expertise, where we're looking at cloud-based analytics and how to marry in domain expertise with those cloud-based analytics and make the data meaningful. But it's extremely important to also use that to, when you're simulating manufacturing processes, to be able to feed the real manufacturing data into that simulated model with those cloud-based analytics, and then assess performance and how to really improve the benchmark of performance. So beyond the product predictive nature, there's a process predictive nature to it as well, which has to be the next evolution of what people think about.
Excellent. Okay, let's see if we can go to a question over here. Yeah. Did we have a question? I believe over here, sir. Over here. Yeah.
Good morning. John Cooley from Procter & Gamble. Edge computing makes some pretty bold promises of business value, but it does come with a fair amount of complexity. It has its own data acquisition, its own programming languages, its own historization, its own integration upward into the cloud. Yet we already have our sites already have existing control and information system architectures. Will this new technology eventually integrate in with our existing control and information systems? Will it gradually replace our control and information systems? Or will it stay as a standalone entity?
Excellent question. Go ahead, Craig.
Thank you. So that's spot on. This idea of edge to enterprise. So you really want to connect the edge all the way back to the enterprise. So vendors jump in and say, well, would you like to buy a new shiny edge controller to do that? Of course, they're going to try and monetize that. And they'll convince you that you need to rip everything out and replace it in order to achieve that. Of course, that's just, that's the way the world works. But in reality, don't get confused by that. You really do just want the data to flow from the edge all the way through to the enterprise, and you want to find the fastest way to do that, which often involves existing infrastructure. So taking existing data and flowing that from that edge up to some hybrid environment, or when you're building out a new facility, a new line or something, a new manufacturing facility, or retrofitting it, choosing that opportunity to put in more flexible infrastructure than you have already, or even retrofitting level 2 sensors into existing, systems that don't have any sensors in them whatsoever, perhaps in other countries, so that you can flow that data from edge. I think it's really important not to get confused by vendors sort of pitching a rip and replace, use my system. I mean, my God, we all went down this MES route for one time. No MES system solves everything. In fact, there's nothing in human history that is not diverse and heterogeneous. I don't know why the manufacturing facility would be that one vendor could solve every problem.
Go ahead.
And I really, really great question. And I think, again, there's a coexistence for both. So I fully concur. This is not a rip and replace strategy, but there's simply things you can't move up in and out of the cloud. Just the time lag in high-speed manufacturing, high-speed processing. Looking at AI, things that would sit locally on the floor on those edge devices. To me, any company that has the wherewithal should be integrating this into the portfolio and into the broader automation landscape. So it's not really you take one out and put another one in, because I think, they're solving different topics and different problems. And it's very, in my view, intertwined with AI and using a lot of predictive work to identify things that you wouldn't, as a human, be able to identify, just with the mass aggregation of data and with the speed of how that data is being moved around.
I was looking for, go ahead, Patrick, quick.
If I was going to offer you one piece of advice, run robust pilots, maybe several. Make them show you the details. I don't mean, obviously there's a base ROI that you're interested in, but look at the details. How will you upgrade it? What are the upgrade costs for real in the lifetime? Cybersecurity, another gentleman mentioned that. Cybersecurity is a real threat. Assess it. Take on the true cost of protecting it for cybersecurity. In the end, edge computing is really just a grand realization of what was already happening in the market, which is you do need there are cases where you need to have very close computing for high speed. Other cases you don't. So that's probably inevitable in the marketplace. I think that's going to evolve over time. Run a good pilot and make sure you get the result that makes your customers happy.
Did we have any comment here? Okay. Well, I will add at ARC, we are doing a lot of research in this area. And I think we have several sessions over the next couple of days where we think this is where all applications, we need to actually come up with a new set of applications. Software is really changing. For example, MES. There are some functions in MES, they need to be done at the edge, whereas there are others, they need to be done in the cloud. So we think that MES needs to be totally actually redesigned by the companies, where they are coming up with, obviously, other thing we talked about, we are going to have these platforms. And MES needs to be split in a whole bunch of smaller, we call them microservices. So there is a whole new way of actually coming up with these software, which are actually much more reliable and much more flexible. So I encourage you folks to actually attend these edge device sessions, because that's where we really see a big change coming to our industry, because a lot of the software that you have, unfortunately, it's not very flexible. And I think that's where we are going to see new applications. Okay, let's see. Did I see another hand up over here? Okay, we have a question over there. Let's go over there. Yeah.
Alex Johnson, Schneider Electric. I'd like to talk to you about the implications of data ownership. For example, if you're collecting data from a number of plants to model the maintenance, what's going to keep them from charging you for the data? Another thing I was curious about is, what about the legal liabilities? If you collect data on maintenance and there's something in that data for that customer that somebody subpoenas, goes in and models it differently and shows that they're not doing best practice maintenance. And then the other one is, if you're selling elevators, gathering data, what if your friend Otis decides he wants to gather that data instead? Or your client decides that what the other guy's doing with his elevator maintenance package is better than what you are. Will you be able to give him, or were you willing to give him access to that data? So data ownership, just as a topic of conversation.
All right. So since there was the question on elevators, so it's a tricky topic, not just for elevators, but automotive and on and on and on. And to be honest, my philosophy is you have to think of the bigger picture. Specific to elevators, I think the base data that is collected actually belongs to the building owners. So they have full access to the information that we are collecting. The analytics and the intelligence that we built on top of it is ours, right? So we have to think of it in that broader context, because as you can imagine, the initial discussions internally were, well, the data is actually owned by the building, so why do we bother? But when you think about it from a holistic standpoint, it makes a lot more sense for us to build that intelligence, those services around it, which make it a lot richer in terms of just the data itself, but the intelligence and the knowledge that surrounds it. And I would say that that is true for other industries as well, where you have to think of it in that broad context. Otherwise, you get caught in this petty dispute of, well, I don't own the data, so I can't actually do anything about it, and you never get started.
Larry? Well, yeah, I think it's a really good question, and we have, as you know, like you, we have more questions probably than answers sometimes. But I think to your initial point, our going in position, right, as the operating companies, it's our data. We bought the plant, we bought the compressor, regardless of the services being provided, right? So that's our going in position, right? That we, at the end of the day, we own the data, right? Because it's really, we're providing using that to provide a product to our customers, right? And then we can kind of negotiate and debate it from there. But I think, and you mentioned GDPR and other things, I do think that's interesting because, one of the discussions that we've started to have internally, again, with the assumption that that kind of regulation will start to spread beyond Europe, right, and other parts of the world, how do we control access to the data within our systems? How do we have to think more around and we hate to say it, right, but our governance processes to make sure that somebody can't pull the data out of one of our systems, and maybe it goes through a couple different steps before they get it, but then all of a sudden now they have ownership of customer data that maybe we didn't want them to have, right? So, and there's technology aspects to that, there's process aspects, there's people aspects, but I do think that's an area, it's sort of like cybersecurity was 5 or 10 years ago when we were just thinking about what it meant. It's an area of greater sensitivity now, and we have to start thinking more around what specific actions we're going to take.
Excellent answer. Craig, do you
I want to add, I mean, that's a real, thornet's nest that you raised there. We have a view, just like yourself, where it's the operator owns the data, it's their facility, vendors help them facilitate it. We also agree that if we derive some sort of algorithm, some machine learning algorithm, of course, we would like to be able to take that out more broadly to products to other customers in time. And we think that works well because then clients are running standard software, not customized software, which reduces their price. But I would say is data provenance. This goes back to the cyber point. The provenance of the data. How can you be sure the data is from where you believe it came from? Look at WikiLeaks, where there's insertions of false data into it to trigger it. And so now, if you go back to the cyber topic, you want to be sure that you have some level of provenance over that data, so you're sure it came from that facility, so you don't go through undue cost or you force some action based on incorrect data, all the way back to cyber. And so I think the perimeter of data is worthwhile bringing in some professionals. I know firms do this to do an audit. They'll do penetration testing on data and security systems. Really, really important.
Patrick?
Yeah, my advice, again, may sound like a key practical piece of advice, but I think, like the smartphone, data ownership is being innovated in the consumer space ahead of the industrial space. And a lot of the industrial data ownership discussions are revolving around GDPR. Many technology companies are just implementing GDPR globally because it's easier and fundamentally it makes sense. I think everyone kind of sees that sooner or later you got to have this conversation like, yeah, actually it is your data. Well, now we have to have a negotiation. Could I give you a better service? If you give me this data, I could give you a better service. Now that's interesting to him. But if it's just, give me your data for free, obviously that's not a sustainable model. So my real advice really is have an adult conversation about what the value is and what you want to gain.
Excellent. Okay, let's see if we can go to the next question here. Yeah. Yeah? Okay. I thought there was a question over there. Okay. All right, there's a question over there. Yeah.
Hi, Gary Chandler from QIO Technologies. So it was great to hear there was 20 countries represented here. I'd like to just get a panel's view of what the situation is across the globe. Different areas running at different speeds. The culture of IT organizations in certain parts of the world compared to other parts of the world, adoption of cloud in the Middle East. What do you see these sort of mega trends across the globe and how best to deal with those?
Okay. Well, who would like to tackle? Obviously, all of you are really global companies. Maybe Nihar, you want to comment?
So from a ThyssenKrupp standpoint, we are a German parent organization, so certainly GDPR is top of mind. And that is more or less what's called the standard that is adopted across the company. Having said that, of course, whether it's the Middle East or anywhere else, as we try to get on the cloud and get onto more of the connected technologies, that does impose challenges, if you will, in terms of you want to deploy a certain technology standard across the globe, whether it's in China or other places, you do run into exceptions, and you have to roll with it more or less. So I don't think there is a easy answer to that, but I think as a company we are starting with GDPR and then looking at how do we adopt to whatever exists within each of the regions that we operate in.
Yeah, so just a comment that I'll make from Siemens. I mean, obviously we're a very large conglomerate that's rooted in the educational and political systems of 190 countries plus globally. Look, I mean, there's a lot of geopolitical tension right now. The general comment that I'll make about the U.S. is much more emphasis on stateside manufacturing. I mean, the corporate tax rate cut really helped. And we think there are a lot of plans on strategy boards. I sit on 2 public boards, and you can clearly see in these strategy boards that what was prioritized investment externally is now being brought back internally. So that'll be a dynamic that will continue to permeate high value, high technology goods manufactured in the country as a stimulus for job creation. The administration supports it, the tax rate policy supports it, and it's gradually making its way through. I think to the topic of digital and cloud, I mean, there are all sorts of different combinations there. So, when you're in China, there's a lot of on-premise based solutions where data is not allowed to leave. And so, so there's adaptations in all these areas. But I think one thing is absolutely true, that when we think about this whole movement of digital, there are certain countries that are advancing at a much quicker pace. Vehicle electrification, there are environments that are advancing at a much quicker pace. So it's really a mixed bag of how innovations are being deployed. The last 2 things that I'll say is that mass urbanization is a big topic in larger cities and infrastructure being needed and smart energy building and advancements. But again, digital permeates that, and also globalization. So people don't want 7 or 8 or 10 different technology standards all over the world. And there was a day where Europe had a technology standard, North America had a technology standard. I mean, this is all being flattened and really minimized. So you can work with supply chains and ecosystems all over the world to be able to get things done and do it very efficiently. So I think this is a major plus and tailwind for the design and manufacturing environments.
Excellent.
Talking as a guy who just moved to London and wakes up every day to Brexit.
Yeah.
I'm living the dream, as it were, of this issue of the silos coming down between the geographies. I just read in the paper this week that most of the air freight into and out of the UK has been booked months in advance to deal with supply chain issues. Yeah. Right, as a belief that physical goods, the distribution of physical goods is going to become much, much harder. So I think this, as it relates to manufacturing, the distribution of physical goods is something certainly I've taken for granted over the last decade. And we're entering a period of at least a decade where distribution of physical goods will become harder, which will mean a whole series of follow-on activities as that relates to how we do our jobs. Now, I totally agree. The topics about on-prem in China. There's a generational shift in China as the moving out of manufacturing to more of a digital point of view. In Europe, pretty advanced. Of course, Germany, the home of Industry 4.0. I mean, everyone's trying to be part of their place. I will say is what I believe is the individuals entering the workforce today. That is the world they are entering. And so they're much more advantaged than me or perhaps many of my colleagues in that we have a bias on how we think the world works. Those entering the workforce today see it truly how it does work. And I think we have to listen a lot more to them in order to go through the next 10 years, which will be quite chaotic.
Larry?
Well, so I guess a couple, maybe to look at in a positive way, I think what I would encourage folks, and we certainly try to do this, right, is because we are a global company, is when you talk about digitalization, there's obviously security risks in different countries, et cetera. But what are parts of the world where they really do certain things really well, and how can we take that and put it in other places, right? So my expectation over time is because of GDPR, in Europe, people will figure out how to manage through that and the technology solutions to help manage through that as well. even though we're not there yet. If you want to look at China, for example, China is much more advanced than the United States per se when it comes to mobile payment solutions and technology and culture, et cetera, right? So, we look at it as a global team and say, hey, what can we take from that and apply that to other parts of the world where maybe they're not quite as advanced culturally in that aspect, but there's still things that we can take from that, right? So really trying to take the best as we learn from these different geographies.
I forgot a point. The question was about cloud, also in the Middle East. So I'm delighted that in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Azure, the first thing when you get off the plane, you hear from Microsoft and Amazon how they're building their cloud instances there. Our customers are excited about that. We're excited about that. That's really going to help.
It's entirely a function of asset wealth and density. If you go find the places that have asset wealth and density, be it China, India, wherever, they have a plan. They all have different plans. Unlike the dot-com boom, which really had an epicenter in the U.S. and then kind of spread out, today technology is so available in so many different ways. Governments and large entities are taking advantage of that technology to suit their own needs, which they should. And as a result, you can see the footprint of that in most of your large cloud vendor layout. So if you look at where they have their data centers, you'll see basically a heat map where you see asset and wealth density.
Okay. I have a question for you folks. Both innovation and collaboration is becoming so important. How are you trying to encourage your employees to be more innovative, collaborate more, and so forth? In essence, actually, you have to change the culture of your companies. If you have some specific initiatives that you are undertaking at your companies to do all that, because that's very fundamental to really change and embark on this digital journey. Okay, maybe Nihar, maybe you want to start.
Sure. So I think the worst thing you can do is tell your people that go innovate, right? And really not equip them with the tools and the ability to do so. So for a company like ours, which is very diverse and in a way hierarchical and things happen in a certain cadence, you need a business plan for everything. We had to change the game. So many examples of how we are doing that, but one specific one that I'll reference here. So we started something called a TK Garage, right? So this is a sort of innovation crucible, if you will, where we bring people from different parts of the company together, and we give them a little bit of funding, and we tell them that you have an X amount of time to work on a certain problem, away from your day job, away from everything else, and see if this idea has legs. And if it has legs, we sort of have it do a Shark Tank style, funding mechanism, where the business leaders are sitting down and they say, I'm willing to put in X amount of dollars to see if this idea goes on to the next round. And what that has done is it actually empowers the people to say, I'm willing to spend certain amount of my time doing this. And when I go back to my day job, I actually take those ideas, those connections, those people with me, right? And I can work on whatever project I'm working on afterwards, but still continue this sort of collaboration and innovation mindset within the function or the business unit or whatever I'm working on. And what we have found is there are some really brilliant ideas that would never have seen the light of day if they had gone through the standard R&D process using big data, AI, you name it, to try and do that. One of the offshoots of that is, you saw earlier today about the HoloLens. What we find is that's actually an excellent collaboration mechanism, and people are now using it in order to talk to their colleagues across the world on projects, as opposed to having to fly halfway around the world for a meeting. They can actually do it virtually much better than they would otherwise do using WebEx or teleconference and so forth. You can visualize what's going on. It's increasing collaboration. And that's just one example of how we are helping foster this culture within the company and increase adoption.
Excellent. Larry, would you take a stab? Yeah.
Sure. So first, I think when you go back to really finding where the ideas come from, I'm still a big believer, going back to my slides, that the way you find that is to walk in the shoes of your customer. That's the better than anything else, to figure out where the opportunities are, right, and understand where their pain points are. And then obviously you have folks who are also versed on the technology side and can help make that link. We don't do it today, but our soon-to-be partner company, Lindy, does, sort of this digital incubator concept, which I do like, and it's something that we frankly tended to be more day-to-day and not giving folks enough space maybe to innovate in this space, and that's something that we're actively working on. And my view of how to do that is because I do want people who are working that, who still are connected with understanding what the problems are, is to have folks who've been in the business for a little while, right, who understand it well enough, and then sort of rotate them through that kind of an environment where they do have to be, in my opinion, dedicated to that task. I'm not a fan of we're going to give everybody 20% of their time to work on quote-unquote innovation, because the day-to-day stuff, just at least for us, the day-to-day stuff is just going to overwhelm that. It's just never going to happen, right? So, take with people who've gained some experience, use it as a development opportunity, cycle them through this kind of incubation activity, right, and give them a chance to see if they can really shine in that area.
Excellent. Anyone else here?
Well, I think it's about diversification of approach. Certainly the best innovations come out there when you're talking to customers or potential customers. The way you approach that can be very different. We've taken a couple of different approaches to diversify our efforts. One, the most simple, once in a while we run a global hackathon. We'll talk to customers, we'll identify a theme, and we'll just challenge 1,000 developers. Set up some teams, we're going to spend 2 days and everyone's going to come up with some ideas. And then we review it with all the execs. And you can see some really innovative shortcuts. You'll also experience, I think, more firsthand what your own people are dealing with and some of the challenges. And likewise, we also created a global innovation hub to work on long-term initiatives that are going to require substantial funding in order to bring something to market that's effective. So I think you've got to diversify your approach, listen to customers, and diversify your approach and investment.
I want to punctuate a point, which is this practitioner point. I think you have to be a practitioner. You have to walk in the shoes of where the customer is and understand their pain points, and then direct the innovation around there. And so that's there's different ways to explain it, but when we went back to our values, we said that we call that flexibility, which is sort of lean into the customer, find a way how to be flexible. Don't be biased based on how you think our company runs. Just be biased around the customer. Don't do everything. No disrespect to any of you in the room, but try to learn from them. And then excellence is try not to. If you're going to do something, don't just be average about it. Try to be the best. Don't just be 20% better than you were before. If you're going to do an innovation, make sure that innovation does something 10 times better than it did before. Not just an incremental level, to really stretch your minds. And finally, you need access to education. Great STEM skills. You need PhDs. Certainly, the topics we deal with are quite complicated, and so you really need that rich sort of raw talent coming through the organization.
Okay. Well, we are coming to last few minutes of our time. Maybe Raj, I could start with you. You have one piece of advice, one kind of takeaway for these folks. What would that be?
Well, I think I prefaced it in my comments, Andy, and I'm going to make it simple. Digitalization will have a transformational effect on operations. It cuts the time to market. It increases quality. We have this in factories that we run, in external environments. You're talking about defects per million of 11.5, so it's a 99% quality rate. Machines optimizing other machines. There are all sorts of combinations as to how this can be scalable. So, my general advice is to really make a concerted effort to start it, scale it, get the organization bought in, and even as generations collide, you have people eligible for retirement here in the next decade. You have a whole new cadre of digital tech-savvy people coming in, and it's extremely important to, people want to work for digitally enabled companies. And this next generation of people coming in simply won't stick around if you don't have the innovative capability in the company and you're not challenging them and you're not driving digital projects. So they'll have a lot of options. Nothing holds them down to a company anymore, but the fact that they like what they do, they like the work they do, they're challenged and they're digitally enabled. So I think that transformation has to start. And again, what I said earlier, the only mistake you make is by not starting. So start now.
Start the journey.
Start the journey.
Craig?
Yeah, it's very similar. I believe that the most precious thing we all have is time. You only have a finite amount of it, so how you choose your time is kind of important. You should wake up every day and think about that. And so in the same spirit here, I'd say run. Run hard. It is later than you think on every level around this transformation. And so, I don't know how to convey that. There's different techniques to drive that within your company, but I really encourage that.
Yeah.
All right. I fully agree that I think you have to start. What I would say is think about customer value, right? I think that's an easy way to anchor yourself and say, if I'm delivering superior customer value, then somehow everything else will work out. And you can work through the entire value chain. Very often I find people start very narrow, and when one pilot fails, the answer is, well, it didn't work out, so maybe I'll go back to doing my day thing. This is a transformation. It's hard. It takes a while to get done, but you have to get started.
Larry?
Well, I'll take the easy way out and just reemphasize something I said this morning, right? Which is, again, digital transformation means whatever you want it to mean and whatever makes the most sense in your business, right? So, give you one simple example. We have plant managers today who maybe they have to get the information they need from a half a dozen different systems to do their day-to-day job. And if, ERPs and HRs and payroll and historians, et cetera. If we can just bring that information to them in one place and make it easy for them to visualize it, to see where the opportunities are, and just help them decide, hey, here's the 5 things you need to work on today. Does that sound like digital transformation? Some people would say no, right? It sounds like modern BI. But for that person, that's transformative, right? And so that's where, right, know your customers, meet them where they're at, and design your transformation activities around that.
Patrick?
Thank you. Real simple. Keep it simple, right? Stay focused on your customers and real value you can measure, and then figure out how to leverage technology. I'm telling you, there will not be another big thing. We're not going to see another big technology and everyone has to, that isn't going to happen. IT is almost unlimited now, practically unlimited. You can get any piece of data on any device to any person with any set of rules with almost unlimited algorithms. Accept it. Take a breath. Get practical about serving your customers and what you do that has value that other people can't do. Run some pilots. If you're not failing at some of them, you're not doing it right. But once you figure it out, nail it and then scale it.
The comment I would make is I think there's a real battle going on around the world. You want to see actually what's going on in Europe. Some of you maybe want to go to a Hanover Fair. It's in April. You will see the whole German government is behind Industry 4.0 initiative. You want to see actually go to Japan, go to China, go to India, go to actually many countries around there. Companies around the world right now are really trying to move as fast as they can. So I think everybody, like we said, we not only need to start, we really need to run. We really need to move fast, because right now I think we are all competing on a global basis, and I think a lot of companies out there are really doing a lot of neat stuff there, and I think we need to move to stay competitive. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists here, folks. Please join me giving a great hand for the panelists.